Hello there and welcome to the Legion Alpha. In this video we're going to preview the Protection Warrior at level 100, demonstrating its mechanics, effects, and showcasing talents in such a way that it should give you an idea of how it can be played. Remember, this is the alpha version of Legion, and just about everything may be subject to change. The Protection Warrior is difficult to demonstrate entirely on a training dummy, so we'll be using the proving grounds to provide examples as to how its mechanics work. There are a couple of bugs with this though. Some enemies may not look like they're attacking, but they definitely are. As a Protection Warrior, you'll be generating rage primarily through being in combat and getting hit, and spending it on either defensive or offensive spells, depending on the situation. Let's have a look at your abilities. Shield Slam. This deals damage to a single enemy and generates 6 rage. It has around a 9-second cooldown. Revenge. This deals damage to all enemies in front of you and generates 4 rage. It has a 9-second cooldown, but its cooldown is reset each time you dodge or parry an attack. The cooldown can only be reset once every 3 seconds. Devastate. This deals damage to a single enemy and has a 30% chance to reset the cooldown of Shield Slam. Devastate costs no rage and has no cooldown. Those are your rage generation abilities you'll be using frequently. That's right, you can only generate 10 rage every 9 or so seconds right now, not including procs. You'll be gaining most of your rage by actually being hit by your foes. Now, let's discuss how you spend your rage. Shield Block. This is active mitigation that causes you to block every melee attack for 6 seconds. While this effect is active, Shield Slam deals 30% additional damage. Shield Block costs 10 rage and has a 12-second recharge time. Ignore Pain. This is a new active mitigation ability that makes you ignore 90% of the next 25% of your maximum health's worth of damage, lasting for 15 seconds. The source of this damage doesn't matter, you will ignore 90% of it. So you could get hit by 100,000 and you'd only take 10,000. But it will only absorb as much as 25% of your maximum health. All of the rest of the damage will come through. This is kind of like an absorb shield and actually shows up on your health bar as one. Ignore Pain costs 40 rage and has a 1-second cooldown. Focused Rage. This enhances your next Shield Slam or Devastate, making it deal additional damage. Focused Rage is not on the global cooldown, costs 30 rage, and has a 1.5-second cooldown. That's how you spend your rage. Let's look at some of your cooldowns now. Demoralizing Shout. This demoralizes nearby enemies, making them deal 20% less damage to you for 8 seconds. It has a 1-minute cooldown. Last Stand. This increases your current and maximum health by 30% for 15 seconds. It has a 3-minute cooldown. Shield Wall. This reduces all damage you take by 40% for 8 seconds. It has a 2-minute cooldown. Spell Reflection. This raises your shield and reflects the next direct spell cast on you within 5 seconds. It also reduces all magic damage you take for its duration, letting it be used to mitigate area of effect abilities as well. Shadow Flame Shield. This is your artifact weapon ability. When used, you channel for 3 seconds, raising your shield and causing all blocks to be critical blocks. Additionally, Shadow Flame bursts from your shield, dealing damage to all enemies in front of you. It has a 45-second cooldown. Those are your cooldowns. Now let's discuss the rest of your abilities. Taunt. This makes an enemy target you and increases your threat generation against them for 3 seconds. It has an 8-second cooldown. Heroic Leap. This makes you leap through the air and deal damage to nearby enemies, and resets the cooldown of Taunt. It has a 30-second cooldown. Heroic Throw. This deals damage to an enemy at range and generates high threat. It has an 8 to 30 yard range and a 6-second cooldown. Intercept. This makes you run at high speed towards the target. If the target is friendly, you will intercept the next attack they receive within 10 seconds, as long as you remain within 10 yards. If used on an enemy, Intercept will root them for 1.5 seconds. It has 2 charges and a 15-second recharge time. It also generates 20 rage. Pummel. This interrupts an enemy and locks them out of their spell school for 4 seconds, with a 15-second cooldown. Thunderclap. This deals damage to nearby enemies and reduces their movement speed by 50% for 10 seconds. It has a 6-second cooldown. Now, let's look at your talents. Tier 1 talents are Shockwave, which deals damage to and stuns enemies in front of you, with a 40-second cooldown. Its cooldown is reduced by 20 seconds if you strike at least 3 targets with it. Siegebreaker, which deals heavy damage to an enemy and knocks them back and down for 1 second. It has a 45-second cooldown. Finally, Warbringer. This causes Intercept to deal damage to nearby enemies and to stun them for 1.5 seconds. Tier 2 talents are Vigilance. This protects a party or raid member for 12 seconds, reducing the damage they take by 30% and causing your taunt to not have a cooldown for the duration. It has a 2-minute cooldown. Bounding Strike. This reduces the cooldown of Heroic Leap by 15 seconds, and causes it to increase movement speed by 70% for 3 seconds after leaping. Finally, Crackling Thunder. This increases the radius of Thunderclap by 100%. Tier 3 talents are Renewed Fury. This causes Ignore Pain to enrage you, increasing the damage you deal by 10% for 6 seconds. Ultimatum. This causes Shield Slam critical hits to make your next Heroic Strike cost no rage and be a guaranteed critical strike. Yeah, Heroic Strike is not available to Protection Warriors right now, so either this talent isn't reading correctly, or Heroic Strike should be available and it's not. Finally, Avatar. This causes you to transform for 20 seconds, dealing 20% additional damage and removing all roots and snares on you. It has a 1.5-minute cooldown. Tier 4 talents are Second Wind. This causes you to gain 6% health every 1 second, as long as you haven't taken damage in the last 5 seconds. Double Time. This increases the maximum number of charges of Intercept by 1. Finally, Inspiring Presence. This grants a passive 3% leech to all allies within 60 yards. Tier 5 talents are Best Served Cold. This causes Revenge to generate 1 additional rage for each target that it hits. Never Surrender, which causes Ignore Pain to ignore up to an additional 30% damage based upon your missing health. Finally, Indomitable. This increases your maximum health by 25%. Your Tier 6 talents are Vengeance. This causes Ignore Pain to reduce the rage cost of your next Heroic Strike by 30%, and causes Heroic Strike to reduce the rage cost of your next Ignore Pain by 30%. Again, Heroic Strike isn't available right now. Into the Fray. This grants you a 5% haste bonus for each nearby enemy up to 5 enemies and 25% bonus haste. Finally, Booming Voice. This causes Demoralizing Shout to also generate 50 rage and increase the damage you deal to affected targets by 20%. Tier 7 talents are Anger Management. This causes every 10 rage you spend to reduce the remaining cooldown of Last Stand and Shield Wall by 1 second. Heavy Repercussions. This causes Shield Slam to extend the duration of Shield Block by 2 seconds, and for Shield Block to increase the damage of Shield Slam by an additional 30%. Finally, Ravager. This throws a whirling weapon at the targeted location, dealing damage to enemies for 10 seconds. While Ravager is active, your parry chance is increased by 30%. Playing the Protection Warrior is quite difficult to judge right now, because with the omission of Heroic Strike, a couple of your talents are kind of pointless. On top of this, the level 75 tier is bugged, preventing you from choosing any of the 3 talents. However, the basic rotation will likely be as such. Use Shield Slam and Revenge on cooldown to generate rage, regardless of how many enemies you are fighting. Keep these 2 abilities on cooldown and watch out for Revenge being reset. If fighting melee enemies, use Shield Block to actively mitigate. This gets stronger the more melee enemies you face and is especially strong against enemies that attack quickly. Use Ignore Pain to mitigate big hits like powerful spells or nasty moments from enemies. Generally, Ignore Pain can be used if Shield Block is on cooldown or is currently active, and you have a lot of rage to spend. You can really use Ignore Pain to dump rage. Use Devastate when your Shield Slam and Revenge abilities are on cooldown. Devastate has a chance to reset the cooldown of Shield Slam, so keep an eye out for that. Against multiple enemies, use Thunderclap on cooldown as well. Use Heroic Throw and Taunt to gather enemies from range. Make sure you use Intercept to generate big chunks of rage if you can find a good time to do so. Consider charging to a party member and then back to your foe for a quick and easy 40 rage. Use Shield Wall, Last Stand, and Demoralizing Shout when you're in danger. You have no way of self-healing, so using cooldowns when you're getting started with learning the Protection Warrior is a good idea. Instead of demonstrating builds, I'll talk briefly about what talents I think will prove useful to you as a tank. Shockwave will be great for stunning multiple enemies, such as Trash, as it always has been, so it's likely the default pick of the tier if you're doing 5-man content. Vigilance will be useful in raids as a cooldown for the other tank, but in 5-man content, Crackling Thunder or Bounding Strike both have their uses. Ultimatum will likely be a good pick for the next tier, as it lets you get out more heroic strikes. Generally, this is going to mean you're going to deal more damage, generate more threat, and hopefully, maybe generate rage. We don't quite know how heroic strike's going to work right now, so I'm just kind of guessing. But generally, being able to do more stuff is good. Double Time will let you intercept more often, which lets you generate more rage and be more mobile. It still generates rage if used on an ally, so more charges of it is great. Best Served Cold will be great in 5-mans when you're tanking a lot of trash, which means lots of extra rage. Indomitable looks like it'll be great in general because more health is good, and Never Surrender will likely make tanking harder content like Mythics a little bit easier. Booming Voice will let you generate rage on demand in addition to mitigating damage, so you can combine the 20% reduction with your active mitigation immediately without having to wait for a certain amount of rage. Finally, Ravager will not only be great for picking up multiple enemies and damaging them, but it will increase your parry chance, making it a survivability cooldown as well. Remember that these suggestions are not backed up by any math, just my own personal instincts as a player. You can do whatever you'd like with this, especially considering that right now, the talents and abilities are probably unfinished. To conclude, the Protection Warrior seems like a very slow spec at first, but as you get into combat and take more and more damage, you will generate more and more rage, and be able to use your mitigation more often. Right now, I feel like we don't have too much control of how we generate rage, so maybe increasing the rage generation of Shield Slam and Revenge may be a good idea, but Ignore Pain is awesome. A low health Protection Warrior is likely going to be quite difficult to kill because of this spell. I'd like to see it have a different animation though, it's a pretty boring animation right now. I feel like including Heroic Strike will make the class play faster as well, so I hope to see it implemented in some fashion in a later version of the alpha or beta. The animations are fantastic, but I'd like to see a new one for Shield Slam and Shield Block, and a more polished Shadow Flame Shield stance. Other than that, I feel like the Protection Warrior has changed a lot, and it will take time to get used to. But it still retains its feeling of being a wall of armor behind a shield, so that's great. Also, I died like 3 times during the Artifact Weapon quest chain, so either that's really hard, or I just suck. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Let me know what you think of these class previews, and if you'd like to see more of them. As always, I wish you the best of luck in the world of Warcraft.